Welcome everyone who happens to be on the call. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure we'll have some additional people jumping on. This is our 10th year of the Boulder Burgundy Festival, and it's a wacky year to be planning a wine festival, that is for sure. So everything virtual this year, as all of you who are sitting here on this call understand and know. So thank you for understanding and just being a part of it, regardless of the craziness that's going on in our world. This year we actually had an amazing group of sponsors jump in and really help out to make sure that we're going to be able to contribute to the charities that we always contribute to. So Berg Hill, Greenleaf, and Rashidi, a great law firm in town here, they've been awesome from day one. George Berg and Kathleen Alt, Walters and Hogsett Fine Jewelers, Mark Virag and his team celebrating 40 years, like the Boulder Wine Merchant, 40 years of doing business in town. They're awesome. This year we have a new sponsor, Christina Davies with Liv Sotheby's International Realty. So thank you to them. And then of course our title sponsor, Corvin, the preservation systems that makes this particular year that much better now that we can, if you wanted to try all 6 of your Chevillon wines today, you can have a little splash of each of them and not feel like you got to open all 6, although it is Friday the 13th. So maybe you want to open all 6 and get things going. So without further ado, let's jump right in. The gentleman that's sharing the call with me today, along with you guys, is Mr. Lyle Railsback, officially the National Portfolio Manager, but all things Kermit Lynch that we know, for those of us that are in the business, how long have you been with the company? 15 years? Yeah. So, I mean, he's the man, taking so many of the great professionals in our industry over to some of their, unbelievable producers all over Europe. And, we all hassle Lyle for everything that we can get out of that portfolio with allocations, and such an amazing book, not just with the Chevillon wines. The list goes on and on and on. I think I don't need to talk too much about that with this group. But with that, let's have you jump right in, and we'll talk a little introduction to the domain and Domaine Robert Chevillon. Let's go.
Well, what an occasion. Thanks for having me. Again, sorry we couldn't do this. Nice to see a lot of cool people on the call. Mark, Ohio, Lynn. It's great to have everyone join us. Chevillon is one of our longtime relationships in Burgundy. Kermit, of course, has been importing his own wines. He started his retail shop in 1972. A few years later, he started importing himself and finding things. Chevillon, he discovered in the late 70s. The first time he imported them was 1980, and it was with a few different vintages in the late 70s. At the time, he was still working with Henri Jaillet. And when Kermit introduced Chevillon to his clients, he said that he thought the best wines of the vintage were Jaillet and Chevillon from anyone in Burgundy. And Nuits-Saint-Georges was kind of, I think, maybe still now, but then kind of an off-the-radar commune. It's really known for having the most amount of négociants and bigger players in it than compared to other villages in Burgundy. In Kermit's introduction to Chevillon, he was reading a lot of old French literature, and they had said that Nuit is kind of like the kidney of Burgundy. And so for Kermit, that was like, okay, maybe Chambertin is the brain, and Santenay is the foot, and I guess that makes Beaune something you don't want to mention. But anyways, Nuits-Saint-Georges, Chevillon's a specialist. This is a small family domain who only makes wine from one appellation. There's a lot of that in Burgundy, where you have a small guy who's just in one village and really a specialist of that. And I think Chevillon sort of takes that to the nth degree, having 8 different Premier Crus that they make. We visited them every January for the last 11 years I've been a part of it, and it's great to go in there and taste from barrel every 8 different Premier Cru sites, and you can really see the terroir and the micro look at one commune in Burgundy. There's not a lot of places when you can do it to this degree as you can with Chevillon. Since Kermit's imported them since the 70s, Robert retired in 2003. And so as long as I've known them, the domain's really been run by Denis and Bertrand Chevillon. So it's a good story of generational takeover there. Here's a map of, there's Bertrand and Denis, and Brett's map of the different single vineyards of Nuits-Saint-Georges. Some of these sites, they have really small parts of, not enough to be bottled separately. So the oldest vines of the domain are what get bottled as Nuits-Saint-Georges Via Vigne. And then there's also some of the Premier Crus that get blended in, that are planted to white grapes, which is both Chardonnay and also what they call Pinot Gouge, which is, some people say Pinot Blanc, some people say it's a white mutation of Pinot Noir, depending on who you talk to, but it's cuttings that they got from Henri Gouge, sort of the other historical producer of Nuits, and so they call it Pinot Gouge for the white wine. So yeah, Brett, should we jump in and talk about the different wines, or what do you want to do here? You're muted, sir.
I was having some difficulties there. Pardon me for just a moment there. Yeesh. Mouse difficulties. Here we are. Yeah, we should definitely do that. I actually have the Aligoté in my glass. So obviously, as a red wine specialist, if there's a very small amount of the Pinot Gouge that comes to the market, we often get maybe a couple of bottles. But if you do want to try some of the Aligoté that's in my glass, it's fantastic. So this is kind of the a lemony, bright, citrusy, mineral scented wine, but definitely has some structure and richness to it. So that's just the one wine outside of that. But then as we get into the meat of these wines, I think, Lyle and I were talking the other day just about the Bourgogne Rouge and how that is kind of a special wine for this property, but also kind of when we talk about producers from Burgundy in general, and just kind of the culture and the history of drinking wines in these areas. I mean, when you go visit some of these places, these smaller producers often are just drinking the Bourgogne Rouge. That is a wine that they are very proud of and celebrate. So we always have that wine. Anytime it's in inventory, we have that wine on the shelf. For the sake of today's conversation, I think I've got the Vieille Vigne and Le Caille. We encourage people, it can be a lot to get a chance to try to get the opportunity to taste all of these wines in one sitting. Having a little Coravin unit preservation system actually makes that a little bit easier if you don't want to open up all six. But I think we would, moving forward, I'm thinking about selling these more in like a 6-pack of getting the opportunity to taste all of them in one go there, because it's having the opportunity to tap into 8 different Premier Cru sites in this area is pretty amazing. So we don't have all of those wines today, but I think it'd be fun to just kind of do a virtual walkthrough of some of these sites, as you visit with this producer on a regular basis. We had talked about 2 of the wines that they start with often, the Chagnot and the Bousselot, and maybe we could just kind of go through. I'm happy to, hopefully not without any issues, put the map back up and we can kind of highlight where some of these are. But you often talk about Nuits-Saint-Georges in 3 different parts, really. There's the north of the village itself, butting up to Vosne-Romanée, and some special sites there. Both Chagnot and Bousselot happen to be just north of the village. And then I think the majority of the cru sites that we often think of when we think of Nuits-Saint-Georges happen to be just south of the village itself. And then Primeur and Précy, as you get to the south there, perhaps a little bit more of the soil that goes with that area that gives a little more lift to those wines. So maybe we can have you go through north to south and kind of talk about some of those sites and what makes them special and maybe some of the character.
Yeah, great. I think maybe we can just briefly, to finish talking about the whites. Every time we visit Chevillon, they of course start pouring their white wines. They make 3 white wines at the Domaine. First there's Aligoté, and I think Aligoté, of course, it's been awesome to watch it kind of become this industry favorite, because for many years it wasn't that. It was, I think, long considered the sort of trash fish of Burgundy. I think you could say without a doubt that Aubert de Villaine, he's spending so much of his years really building the Domaine in Bouzeron and making that a serious place for white wine and not just a throwaway wine that's aged on the plains. I think that's really taken a center spotlight for Aligoté. And the one that's produced at Chevillon is delicious. They don't make a lot of it. It's planted in and around the rows at Nuits-Saint-Georges. So they make Bourgogne Blanc, they make Aligoté, and then they have this Nuits-Saint-Georges Blanc, which is a blend of Chardonnay and Pinot Gouge, as mentioned earlier. But I think the style of white wines here is, I think, kind of, for me, rustically charming in this kind of old sensibility. I think so much white wine in Burgundy now, there's definitely, as you see, sort of trends and people following fashion. I've heard other people in the business who don't work for Kermit Lynch sort of refer things as to like the Rouleau effect. Jean-Marc Rouleau, who we work with in Meursault, is an amazing, amazing producer. But you see this sort of, as people have dealt with Primox and going through the 90s, finding ways to sort of combat that and work against it. And I think what Jean-Marc has done, certainly racking white wine into stainless steel after its time in wood to sort of make it more tension and make a really sort of high acid, really zippy kind of straight wines. It's an amazing thing, but I think a lot of people are now just sort of following that as kind of a recipe, a formula, rather than each having their own unique take on things. And I see Chevillon whites as kind of being this older style that's maybe nothing to do with that, but more round and sort of waxy. They do allow mallow. I think one of the things I've really taken working for Kermit is Kermit's obsession with malolactic in white wines. And Kermit's now in his mid-70s, but if you get him in the room for 10 minutes, he'll bring up the subject of malolactic in white wine at least 3 times. It's like, it's all he wants to talk about. He says he'll be remembered as the anti-filtration guy, but he wants to be remembered as the malolactic in white wine and rosé guy. So it's really been something he's preached for the 45 years of his career. And yeah, I think having that roundness and the creaminess in the palate, but also harvesting early to have good freshness and good acidity in the wines. You see that with all 3 of the Chevillon white wines.
Yeah, super delicious and approachable, like crazy aromatics right now. I mean, they're really, really delicious. And as you pointed out, this is a wine that, you know, once people were just adding syrup to, and now it's actually a fashionable, very, very serious wine that has tons of application at a wine shop or in a restaurant. So, fun stuff.
And of course, planting Aligoté with, you know, restricting yields so that it's not just this large commodity wine. These are people who are making Aligoté with the same care and attention as they are Chardonnay. So it's, I think also you have to pay respects to climate change in a place like Burgundy. Although it's been trying for a lot of people, it's also guys are making wine every year that's perfectly ripe and that they can sell. And you talk to old importers. I was in a room once with Bruce and Kermit, and they were talking about how in the 60s and throughout the 70s, there were literally 2 vintages of the decade where you would buy all the wine. Today, we don't have this problem. It's really an embarrassment of riches, and ripeness isn't the problem that it used to be. So there are other problems, of course, that come with that as a reverse. But getting into the red wines, I think before we talk about the Bourgogne, before this, they make a Passe-Tout-Grain, which it's the only Passe-Tout-Grain that we import at Kermit Lynch. So it's certainly a favorite. It's 2 parts Gamay, 1 part Pinot Noir. And I think of it as this lovely sort of picnic wine. As we were saying on the call the other day, I think one of the things I really learn more about every time I go to Burgundy is how they use wine. And Kermit certainly has spent decades sort of preaching this gospel of, like, I think in America, and as I learned about wine, we learn about wine in this sort of hierarchy of price dictating quality and sort of the market dictating what good wine means. And I think I worked the harvest in 2011 with Francois Carillon, and every morning we would have casse-croûte at around 11 o'clock. Before lunch, it was the favorite time of the day. Everyone's been working for a few hours. You know, they've worked up an appetite. It's not time for lunch yet. So they gather a little picnic table. They bring some saucisson and some cheese and bread, and they open up some bottles. And these are guys who can they could open up Bienvenue if they wanted to, but they specifically don't, because a wine like Bienvenue doesn't make sense for Casse-Croûte. But a wine like Aligoté or a wine like Pas-tu-Grain, these are wines for drinking. These are wines for breakfast and for lunch and for enjoying without sort of having the moment to enjoy them. But I really took that away from Burgundy, and I love that. I think the Pas-tu-Grain at Chevillon really speaks to that. And the Bourgogne Rouge is, it gives you some of these characteristics of Nuit and some of this gaminess. People, whatever book or whatever you read on Nuits-Saint-Georges, people always go back to the sort of wild, gamey aspect of wines of the region, and I think you begin to see that here in this in the Bourgogne Rouge.
Super delicious. Over delivers all the time. That's great. Is this a combination of a few parcels? What is the breakdown of this?
Yeah, it is.
Of the vineyard?
Yeah, I couldn't get from them a list of exactly where and what, but it's a combination of parcels in and around the vineyards just below. He's on the other side.
This is quite structured indeed for Bourgogne Rouge for sure.
Yeah. I think it shows to me a good representation of this vintage. As I mentioned to you when we visited them this January, we were tasting mostly 18s, and the 18s are so showy and open, easy, a lot more fruit, a lot more color, and then 17s, by contrast, were a little bit more tense, a little bit more structure to them. I think with time, right now they're a little bit angular.
And let's talk quickly before we jump into the actual wines and go through some of the single sites. The general philosophy of some of the winemaking. These guys are traditional in the way of farming. They've been doing it for 5 generations. This is, they're doing Lut Raisonné as if you had to categorize them. They're not necessarily, heading down the biodynamic thing or anything crazy with that, but have been doing it, for many generations, which is kind of a fun thing to pay attention to. Probably in the path of the Henri Jaillet thing, everything is destemmed always. Pigeage with daily pump over, I think, is generally across the board for everything. And then when we look at the use of oak with some of these wines, we're looking at 20 to 30% at most. And the wines are pretty much made the same way, which is, it's always been for a buyer. When I look at the offer and, there's 8 of these wines, without being there and tasting the wines at a couple times of the year, in barrel and in finished product, it's hard to, without calling up Lyle and saying, what should I buy? It can be a little bit of a, question mark as to, what's gonna deliver in the future. But I think it takes a couple of years for the personality to start to develop, considering the wines are made so similarly from one site to the next. Would you not say?
Yeah. I think stylistically, when after Kermit discovered Chevillon, at the time he wrote that his favorite winemakers in Burgundy were Hubert de Monti and in Gevrey-Chambertin. He was also working with Roti at the time. He said these guys were like the 2 guiding lights for him. They both, recommended Chevillon and thought he was certainly the best in Nuits-Saint-Georges. Stylistically, it was very different from what de Monti was doing at the time, of course. De Monti is a lot different now, but Etienne is running it. But I think Kermit has this long relationship with Jaillet, and destemming and sort of approachability in wine is a key, but not always. I think the old Chambolle Musigny's that we used to import from Berthaud back in the day, those were super structured wines that you couldn't even think about drinking young. And I think, Kermit really looks for things in both camps. And I think Chevillon, to me, are wines that are super approachable and accessible young. I think they taste great out of the chute, maybe with the exception of some of the very top Premier Crus. But they also are wines that can age really well. And as I was mentioning to you, every year when we visit them, they're opening up old dusty bottles from the cellar without labels, and we have to play the game of guessing which vintage they're from. And it's always humbling to have to do that and see that the wines are way more youthful than you thought they were, or vice versa. But stylistically for me, they're traditional. They're not showy in terms of oak usage or too much of anything, really.
Awesome. So let's talk about some Nuits-Saint-Georges. Let's jump right in with the Via Vin. If you want to talk about that, and then we can move through some of the actual Premier Cru and discuss just style and character.
Yeah, the Via Vin's always the best wine to drink from them on release. And when you look at wine, the sort of hierarchy of the more money, the better it must be. The producers never drink wine like that. This one always shows better out of date. The old vines certainly give it this kind of sappy richness and good fruit concentration. It is coming from several sites. A lot of Premier Cru that's just declassified. It changes slightly. John Houston Stellar this wine for 2017. He said it's really great things for them. Really like what they have to offer this wine is outstanding. I think he's one of the best about wine experience. Really has enough great not want to lavish crazy stores. Yeah, I love the texture here. Got really like pretty red fruit. Talk about finesse. You talk about sort of lightness. And I think reading through like stuff that Kermit was writing about in the 80s and early 90s, it was always this kind of poking fun of Robert Parker. And the vast majority of the day, people would be giving scores based on color and weight alone. Kermit's philosophy that I've really learned is that the only time you really pay attention to weight is when you're choosing the wine to go with the dinner, not choosing which wine to buy. Kermit buys barrels of wine and makes his selection at a given domain. It's always really fascinating to me. If you're having a roasted chicken or you're having a lamb or something richer, decide which vintage you want to pick for that. But I think, the idea in America, certainly, I think it's changed now. I think finesse is not a bad food like it used to be. High and light. It's not bad, but there was a long period of time where in this country reviewing things based on the color of the body. It's nice to see kind of food past that as Americans.
Yeah, these wines are super finesse driven. And I think, it's probably a combination of the way they handle them, but also the fact that the oak presence is not overwhelming in any way, shape, or form. The wines have that detail and the character that you want in a great Pinot Noir in this example. But it's not. I mean, the wood is absolutely just kind of in the background and adding character and structure to the wine for sure, which is kind of fun because I mean there are I kind of think of this as one of the few that is in this category still as a very traditional. I mean there are certainly a dozen or so producers that are also still kind of in that traditional camp, but we often thought of like Henri Gouge as one of the very very classic traditionalists. I think that style has changed a little bit in the last couple of years. So you know years ago I used to think of these wines as oh they're so structured and it's they're not going to be approachable for many years, but I mean as I'm sitting here on this call drinking this 2017, it's beautiful and aromatic and lifted and the texture is pretty. It'll be interesting to say, did you taste the 18s did you get a chance to get over there in January?
Yeah, we tasted all the 18s. They're like I said, they're even more showy out of the gate for me than the 17s. 17s are open and approachable, certainly now, I think, maybe more so than regular, but I think the 18s are even more like giving gushing fruit right now, but 17s may be the kind of thing that has, you can drink now, but also has maybe more stale.
Yeah, it might be when the 18s arrive here sometime soon. The put the 17s in the cellar for a few and see how they develop. I don't think they need much time, but I think a lot of character will actually build just in even like a year or two of cellar time. So it'll be exciting to see where these go. Should we talk some single sites here? Should we start in the north of Nuit there and go talk about Chagnon and Bousselot a little bit?
If you want to try to rock your map up there again, we can look at the sites and talk about them a little bit. Cool. It's hard to see on my screen. I don't know about everybody else.
You see the two in the north there, just north of the town there, Busselot and Chagnon.
Yeah, so as I was mentioning, those are the two, when we start the tasting of Premier Crus at Chevillon, those are the two we always start with. They're the two sites that are north facing. So they're a little bit more reserved, a little cooler, of course, a little bit more delicate in their flavors. As mentioned, there are 8 different Premier Crus here. When Kermit started with them, the first year that he brought in the wines, he only brought in 2, but obviously times were different back then. He started by only bringing in the Caille and the Vaucran, which are usually 2 of the last ones we taste, along with the Nuits-Saint-Georges. Now we buy everything they make, whatever they give us, we'll buy it. So, yeah. But I think there wasn't as much of a market then, and Kermit could kind of just cherry pick his favorite 2 cuvées, and Caille's always been his favorite, and I think it's always been my favorite too. It's a little bit more, the word Caille, it certainly sounds like the word quail in French, but it's, I guess historically it references more the caillou, the limestone stones that are there, and not the quail. Chevillon has always told us that they've actually never seen quail running through the vineyard, but I think every book on Burgundy you open mentions something about Caille and the quail. And Kermit's early analogies were that the quail is a bird who curiously doesn't really fly. It likes to run. And so for him, the wines of Le Caille were kind of like a runner. They were it's like Craig Lewis, like very, svelte and muscular and angular. And that's kind of like the Nuits-Saint-Georges wine that comes out of this parcel. They're a little bit more racy and a little bit more taut, not as giving as some of the other sites. Certainly you get more fruit from Busselot or Perrier, Prunier. Vaucran is kind of, there's really 3 Premier Crus on the far Primo Prezi side that are considered kind of the Uber Premier Crus. I believe they're slated to one day become Grand Cru. I don't know how long that process will take or how serious it is, but the Vaucran, the Caille, and the Nuits-Saint-Georges are all kind of the Uber Premier Crus among everything else they make. But I think that also means that perhaps they don't drink as well out of the gate as some of the other bottlings. Sometimes the Perrier and the Prunier for me are much more showy and much more accessible, much more giving, at least for the next couple years.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, it looks like, Chagnon is what, it looks like 5.8 hectare, east facing, primarily, 260 to 280 in terms of the meters in elevation there, gravel and alluvial based soil, and you often see a lot of as they call it, the primo limestone that populates a lot of these vineyards, depending on which area you happen to be in. Certainly, like a vineyard like Perrier, showing more of the rocky nature of the soil in that area. No.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean these things. It's the entire production at Chevillon is less than 2,000 cases. A good year is like 1,500 cases. When you look at their vineyard holdings, something like Chagnon is one of their largest. They have 1.5 hectares. Most of their holdings are less than half of a hectare. So even Nuits-Saint-Georges is 0.6 hectares. It's really like sort of using an eyedropper to parcel out these vineyards.
Awesome. So what night? So you talked a little bit about Nuits-Saint-Georges as possibly being elevated to Grand Cru. Do you think that will actually ever happen, or do you think we're just wishful thinking for some of the producers there?
They've mentioned it for a few years now, so I think it's a pretty long process. Every time we go to Alsace too, they're talking about the different sites that are going to be elevated to Grand Cru, and the other Grand Crus that are going to be de-escalated to Premier Cru. So I think with such a long tradition in history here, who knows how long it'll happen.
Sounds good. What should we taste the Kai? Do you have that in your glass right now?
I'm not fortunate enough to have the Kai with me.
Ah.
Kai.
Well, allow me to pour a little in my glass, and we'll discuss here. While we're doing this, does anybody have any questions or ideas or thoughts on some of the wines here? No. I cannot get out of this. There we are. Feel free to jump onto chat if anybody has questions for Lyle. While we're waiting for any questions, I'm going to taste a little Kai. Pretty awesome. Certainly a little deeper, darker berry fruit in that particular wine as compared to just the Vieille Vigne. Just a little bit more core of dark fruit concentration. That would be the immediate, as I bring the glass to my nose, for sure. These wines are super silky. I love the 17s are really red fruited and bright and have a nice roundness to them for sure. Do you, how much, we talked a little bit the other day about some of the amount of time that you might wait to enjoy some of these wines. Have you, and I was actually interested, it was interesting for me to hear that you said that you often prefer these wines in a more youthful example, but that they certainly are capable of aging for decades. Could you just speak to a little bit of some of your experience? You get a chance to, more than any of us on the call today, go over and taste some of these wines, the older and the younger vintages. Just talking to that would be great.
Yeah, when we visited last, they opened a 96 for us, 96 Busolo, and it was drinking great, just starting to get into its own. I think that, I guess I like drinking them young only because that's how I usually get to drink them here in the States. Every year we get to taste some older bottles at the Domaine. But I haven't, I've had stuff back through the 80s and early 80s, and the wines hold up great and can be really surprisingly youthful. But I think they're also wines that you don't need to wait on. And I just think as a culture now, so much of us, a lot of our business is restaurants, or at least it was before COVID, and we drink wines pretty young. And I think I like the idea of like old style, like Dimonti, back when Hubert was making the wines. I like this idea as a culture that you can have a wine that you have to sit on for 10 years before opening. But I think it's rare that many businesses can buy that and sit on something. So to have a wine like Chevillon that you can drink great, you can buy it and drink it tonight, is nice. But then the fact that you can also age it for 20 or 30 years is, to be able to have a leg in sort of both camps is obviously the ideal sweet spot. C. Bloomfield is asking about the older to younger, the difference in grain of tannins and climate change on the wine. Certainly, climate change, all of these producers, Chevillon says the same thing as a lot of our Burgundy producers, that they're harvesting a month earlier than they were less than 20 years ago. So it's certainly this year, 2020 in Burgundy, the records that go back to the 15th century say it's the single earliest harvest on record in Burgundy. So if you don't believe in climate change, we can't help you. Now, they're definitely doing things differently. A lot of growers are talking about canopy management. Certainly, a lot of the reason Pierre de Benoist, who now makes the wines at Domaine de Villain, when he started making wines, his uncle Aubert set him up at Dimonti, and Dimonti would open a lot of older Volnets from the 50s for him, and he's tasting these wines from the 50s, and he's telling Pierre, wines back then, we were doing pigeage 5 times a day for 2 weeks, and Pierre's like, just his mind is blown, like, why would you possibly do that? And pigeage for them back then was kind of trying to replicate ripeness because they couldn't get ripeness throughout the 50s and 60s. So by doing a lot of pigeage and extracting as much as they could from the skins and using whole clusters, it was a way to sort of approximate this idea of fruit and ripeness, which of course today we have no problem getting. And I think when Jaillet really took this stand about de-stimming, it was kind of at this magical time when things started getting warmer as well, and so maybe you didn't need to as much. And I don't know, that's an interesting idea. What do you think, Brett?
I think it's interesting from, I would agree that climate change has made the plants, switch things up a little bit in some of the vintages. So I think, certain vintages you might have thicker skins, a little bit more anthocyanin that create a little bit more color in the wines. I think there is more of a vintage expression for a producer like Chevillon that is doing relatively the same stuff in the cellar every year. I think it does highlight more of the vintage and or climate issues that some of the producers might be working with. So if we're looking at 17 as compared to 18, where you have a much warmer vintage, certainly there's these ups and downs with hail and frost and all these I think across the board the producers have described the weather as being more severe. But I think it'd be interesting to hear more about from some of these producers how they see the plants change, because I do think that the vintages are much more representative of what the plants are doing, reacting to some of the weather change. Have you heard anybody discuss some of that when you've been in some of the cellars?
Not about the particular plants, other than the fact of discussing canopy management. In the past, everyone was trying to leaf pull and have extreme exposure to the grapes so that they would get enough ripeness. Now it's the opposite problem. Everyone's trying to have enough leaf cover so that the grapes don't get sunburned, but they can have a longer in time without having too high alcohol. Yeah, I mean, in fact, a lot of Burgundy now is pushing over 14 degrees, and we're having these riper vintages more and more. It's interesting, and I think the stylistic question is also interesting because 1982 Bordeaux was this famous year that changed everything for Robert Parker and for American wine writing, and because of this vintage and promoting good ripeness, everyone tried to make a 1982 the years following. So, trying to make a year like that, year where ripeness isn't necessarily there, you have to resort to tricks. As far as adding color chemicals and things, you just sort of not taking what nature gives you, I guess. And I think Chevillon's producer is doing less intervention, but certainly they're adapting things. In the warmer vintages, they're harvesting earlier, so it's not where you draw that line about respecting nature and respecting the vintage. You also just trying to make good and delicious wine is a moving target.
Do these guys ever talk about the difference? If you're looking at the vine age difference in some of these. I mean, Kai is close to 80-year-old vine. Is that right? Are those some of their older vines that they have planted currently?
Yeah, Kai's 80 years old. They've got, that's Kai, and then what goes into the Viogniers, it's harder to say because it says it's on average 50 years, but a lot of them are older than old, so it's kind of a rough aggregate. It's a lot of older things. Also, the Vaucran from them, which is their other kind of, if you will, uber premier cru. That's the same age as Kai.
Makes sense. And Vaucran is typically the wine that, if you are tasting with them, is that the wine they usually finish with in a tasting?
It depends on the year. It alternates between that or the Nuits-Saint-Georges. The Nuits-Saint-Georges is usually the one that everybody wants the most. I think it's the best. And it certainly is a fantastic wine. And a lot of people think it's like the Premier Cru. It could be a Grand Cru. The Vaucran is generally a little bit more muscular and broader shouldered to me. And the Kai is a little bit more graceful and feminine, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the 17s are probably not going to be available to do a mixed pack, but as soon as the 18s come in, if anybody is interested in doing, 6, 8, whatever it is when the wines arrive. It'd be fun to. I'd be happy to put together some boxes that are one of each bottle to put in the cellar and enjoy at some point. Definitely, I think that's a fun exercise. It is one that I have actually not done with this producer, so I'm quite curious. And you know, one of these times I'll be on that January trip to go through the cellar and taste with you. So
Yeah.
might be a little bit.
Back to Europe so much.
For sure. Absolutely. Do we any other questions from the crew before we kind of move in the direction of wrapping things up? Anything about purchasing these wines or storing them or vintages or anything and everything Kermit Lynch? This is a chance. Here it is. No, these are special wines. I know we had originally talked about having Bertrand on the call. It sounds like he was traveling today and doesn't speak a ton of English, and we would have had to loop in some of the office and bone for some translation. In his absence, it's been awesome having you with us today, Lyle. I appreciate it. You got to get some you got to get some for sure. You got to get some furniture in that room, though, buddy.
Yeah, they're doing construction, so my place is too noisy. So
That's amazing, fabulous. The awesome. Well, I think if nobody has any questions, I just wanted to say some of these wines are available. We do have quite a few of the bottles of the Bourgogne Rouge, the Caille, Vievine, Le Saint-Georges, and some of the Aligoté. I know there's a little bit with Stelvio. Craig said he had maybe a few of the wines, but we're kind of at the tail end of the 17 offering and moving into the to the 18. When do 18s arrive?
18s are ready to ship now. So we have, I think the Colorado got the 17s a little bit later just because everything's been delayed because of tariff fear and all that. So 18s are ready to ship now. I think they'll come in early next year.
Yeah. And do you guys, obviously we're all dealing with the tariff stuff. Do you, as a company, are you guys, is there any sort of strategy that you have that, other than just dealing with the increase? I mean, it's kind of the issue.
Yeah, there's no. I wish I had something to tell you. Revolutionary, but we talked to every single producer of ours. We asked them if they were in a position to possibly lower pricing. If so, Kermit Lynch matched that price to match the discount, so we could sort of cover some of the tariffs. Unfortunately, a lot of these small farmers aren't in a place to do that, so we work with 205 growers. It's a challenge, but I think Kermit's macro view of the thing is, he started his business at the end of the Mideast oil crisis, where every wine shop in the Bay Area was discounting things and going out of business. Kermit said the key to his success was not having inventory. We had to sort of start from scratch. When I started working for Kermit in 08, the euro was at 1.65. So even the tariffs now aren't even as bad as that if you factor in the exchange rates. It's not pleasant. Of course, no one wants to pay more for something like fine Burgundy. But I think we'll get through it, and hopefully with this new administration, it'll be behind us.
Well, we'll keep buying the wines, tariff or not. It's I mean, even with the tariff, there's still the value is there. I mean, relative to what other producers out there, this quality is awesome. So really a treat to enjoy all the wines. Thank you, Lyle, for your time, and Kermit Lynch and Stelvio for making the wines available to us. You're generous with the allocations, and it makes our customers happy and makes me happy. So thank you for that. Again, thank you to all of our sponsors: Berg Hill, Greenleaf, and Rashidi, Walters and Hogsett, Liv Sotheby's International Realty, and of course Coravin as our title sponsor this year. They've been so fantastic. All of the sponsors. I think we're going to be able to make a nice contribution to some of our charities. So I'm happy about that, even in a virtual setting here. And these all of our seminars throughout. We had one last week with Lafon today, and then again tomorrow we'll be talking Angro. They will all be, we already have the Lafon video up on the website, but these will all be on the website for people to enjoy and purchase the wines when you'd like and enjoy the videos, and certainly reach out if you guys have any questions. But other than that, have a fantastic weekend, and Lyle, thank you again. Really appreciate
Thank you, guys.
it. Awesome. Cheers.